We live in a time where many people are exhausted not from hard work, but from trying to please everyone around them. They wake up thinking about what others will say. They make decisions based on people's approval. They change their personality just to avoid criticism. But here is a powerful truth: no matter how hard you try, you will never please everyone. Even if you sacrifice your time, your happiness, and your beliefs, someone will still complain. And that is exactly why Islam teaches us something liberating. Your goal is not to please people, your goal is to please Allah. When a person understands this, a huge weight lifts from their shoulders, because suddenly life becomes clear. You stop chasing applause, you stop fearing opinions, and you start focusing on what truly matters: the pleasure of Allah. People spend a huge portion of their lives chasing something that was never meant to be the goal in the first place: the approval of other people. From a young age, many of us are conditioned to think that our worth depends on how others see us. We adjust our words so that no one gets upset. We shape our personalities so that everyone feels comfortable around us. We make decisions not because they are right, but because they are popular. Slowly, without even realizing it, our lives begin to revolve around the opinions of people who themselves are uncertain, imperfect, and constantly changing. The truth is that human approval is one of the most unstable things in this world. The same people who praise you today may criticize you tomorrow. The same crowd that supports you in one moment may turn against you in the next. History is full of examples where individuals were admired at one time and rejected at another. This happens because human judgment is influenced by emotions, personal interests, misunderstandings, and shifting trends. If a person builds their life around pleasing people, they will always be running after something that keeps moving further away. Islam teaches a completely different way of thinking. Instead of chasing the satisfaction of people, a believer is taught to focus on something far greater and far more stable: the pleasure of Allah. When a person understands that Allah sees every action, hears every word, and knows every intention in the heart, the perspective of life begins to change. Suddenly, the goal is no longer to gain applause from people, but to earn acceptance from the one who created the heavens and the earth. Allah's approval is not like human approval. People judge based on appearances, rumors, and incomplete information, but Allah judges with perfect knowledge and absolute justice. People may misunderstand your intentions, but Allah knows the sincerity within your heart. People may overlook your sacrifices, but Allah sees every struggle, every tear, and every effort you make for the sake of goodness. This understanding frees a person from a heavy burden. Instead of constantly worrying about what others think, the believer begins to ask a much more meaningful question: is Allah pleased with what I am doing? This question becomes a guide in everyday life. It influences the way a person speaks, the way they treat others, the way they earn their livelihood, and the way they respond to challenges. The focus shifts from impressing people to living with sincerity and purpose. Many people experience anxiety and exhaustion because they try to maintain an image that keeps everyone happy. They fear criticism, rejection, or disapproval, so they hide their true beliefs and values. Over time, this creates inner conflict. A person begins to feel disconnected from their own identity because they are constantly adjusting themselves to fit the expectations of others. Islam offers a path out of this struggle by reminding believers that their true worth is not determined by public opinion, but by their relationship with Allah. When someone prioritizes the pleasure of Allah, their decisions become clearer and more confident. They are no longer easily shaken by praise or criticism because their focus is anchored in something much deeper. If people appreciate them, they remain humble and grateful. If people criticize them unfairly, they remain patient and composed, knowing that their true accountability is before Allah. This mindset does not mean ignoring people or treating others with disrespect. Islam teaches kindness, compassion, and good character. A believer still strives to treat family, friends, neighbors, and society with dignity and care. However, the difference lies in the intention. The goal is not to gain admiration or approval from people, but to fulfill a duty toward Allah by showing goodness to His creation. There is a powerful sense of peace that comes from living with this understanding. When a person realizes that the ultimate purpose of their life is to seek Allah's pleasure, many unnecessary worries begin to fade away. The endless race for validation slows down. The fear of being judged becomes less overwhelming. The heart becomes calmer because it is focused on something eternal rather than something temporary. The world constantly encourages people to seek attention, recognition, and approval. Social environments often reward those who conform to popular expectations. Yet the believer is reminded that real success is not measured by how loudly the world applauds, but by how sincerely a person strives to please Allah. This shift in perspective transforms the way a person views success, failure, criticism, and praise. When the heart becomes attached to the pleasure of Allah, life gains a deeper meaning. Every action, no matter how small, becomes significant. A kind word, a moment of patience, an act of honesty, or a quiet prayer in the night all carry value because they are done for the sake of Allah. The believer begins to understand that the most important audience is not the crowd of people around them, but the one who knows them better than they know themselves. One of the most exhausting ways to live is constantly trying to make everyone around you happy. At first, it may seem like a good intention. A person wants to avoid conflict, wants to be liked, wants people to speak well about them, so they begin adjusting their behavior to meet everyone's expectations. They change their opinions depending on who they are talking to. They hide their true feelings to avoid disappointing others. They agree with things they know are wrong simply because they do not want to upset anyone. Over time, this habit slowly becomes a lifestyle where a person measures every decision by the reactions of people rather than by what is right. This constant need to satisfy everyone creates a deep sense of pressure inside the heart. A person begins to carry the emotional weight of many different expectations. One group of people wants them to behave in one way, while another group expects something completely different. Family members may demand one thing, friends may demand another, and society may demand something else entirely. Trying to fulfill all these expectations at the same time becomes impossible. Yet many people keep trying, believing that if they work harder, they will eventually reach a point where everyone is satisfied. But the reality is that the more someone tries to please everyone, the more complicated their life becomes. Every decision turns into a mental struggle. Instead of asking what is right or beneficial, the mind keeps asking, who will be upset if I do this? Or how will people react if I say that? This constant analysis drains emotional energy and fills the heart with anxiety. Even simple choices begin to feel heavy because the person is no longer living freely, but is instead trying to manage the feelings and opinions of everyone around them. Another danger of living this way is that it slowly pushes a person toward hypocrisy without them even realizing it. When someone constantly adjusts themselves to please different groups of people, they begin presenting different versions of themselves in different situations. With one group, they behave in one way, and with another group, they behave completely differently. They say things they do not truly believe just to gain approval. They laugh at things they do not actually find funny. They remain silent when something wrong is happening because they are afraid of losing acceptance. This creates an inner conflict where the outward behavior of a person no longer matches what they truly feel inside. The heart becomes uncomfortable because it knows that something is not right. A person may appear calm on the outside, but inside they feel lost, confused, and emotionally tired. They may begin to question who they really are because their identity has been shaped so much by the expectations of others that they can no longer clearly see their own values and beliefs. Trying to please everyone also places a person on an endless treadmill where satisfaction is always temporary. Even if someone manages to make people happy for a moment, it rarely lasts. New expectations quickly replace the old ones. Someone who was pleased yesterday may become critical today. People may forget the sacrifices you made for them and focus only on the one moment where you could not meet their expectations. This creates a cycle where the person keeps giving more and more of themselves, but still feels that it is never enough. The emotional consequences of this lifestyle can be very heavy. Many people who constantly seek approval begin to struggle with feelings of stress, frustration, and low self-worth because their sense of value depends on how others respond to them. Their confidence rises and falls with every compliment or criticism. A few kind words can make them feel accepted for a moment, but a single negative comment can deeply hurt them and stay in their mind for days. Another painful effect is the gradual loss of authenticity. Every human being has a unique personality, unique thoughts, and unique strengths. When someone spends their life trying to match everyone else's expectations, they slowly hide these natural qualities. They become cautious about expressing their true opinions. They hesitate to stand firm on what they believe is right. They begin to feel like they are acting out a role instead of living a sincere life. Islam encourages believers to live with honesty and sincerity rather than constantly seeking approval. A believer is taught to value truth over popularity and integrity over temporary praise. When a person understands that it is impossible to satisfy every human being, they begin to release themselves from unrealistic expectations. They start focusing on doing what is right rather than what is most likely to gain applause. People's opinions will always change because people themselves change, their moods change, their interests change, their understanding changes. A person who builds their life around pleasing others becomes trapped in a cycle of constantly adjusting to these changes. The heart becomes restless because it is chasing something unstable. The more effort is put into gaining approval, the more fragile that approval becomes. Many individuals eventually reach a point where they realize how much energy they have spent trying to make everyone happy while neglecting their own peace of mind and spiritual growth. They look back and see years filled with worry about how others perceive them. They recognize how often they remained silent when they should have spoken the truth, or how often they went along with something wrong simply to avoid disapproval. This realization can be painful because it reveals how much of life was shaped by fear of people rather than by strong principles and sincere faith. When people feel hurt by criticism or rejection, they sometimes begin to believe that something is wrong with them. They assume that if they were kinder, smarter, more patient, or more careful, then everyone around them would accept them and speak well of them. This belief pushes many individuals to constantly change themselves in order to avoid judgment. They imagine a life where everyone approves of them, where no one disagrees with them, and where their actions are always welcomed by others. But this idea ignores one very important reality that history clearly shows us. Even the greatest and most righteous human beings who ever lived were not able to please everyone. The prophets, who were chosen by Allah, who carried the message of truth, who demonstrated the highest levels of patience, mercy, honesty, and wisdom, still faced criticism, rejection, and opposition from people around them. Their character was pure, their intentions were sincere, and their mission was guided by divine revelation, yet there were still individuals who doubted them, opposed them, and even mocked them. This teaches an extremely powerful lesson about human nature. If the prophets themselves could not gain universal approval despite their truthfulness and righteousness, then it is unrealistic for ordinary people to expect that everyone will always support and admire them. The expectation that we can live in a way that satisfies every person around us is not only unrealistic, it goes against the very pattern of human behavior that has existed throughout history. Consider the challenges faced by the prophets when they conveyed the message given to them by Allah. They spoke the truth even when that truth challenged the traditions, habits, and beliefs of their communities. Many people welcomed the guidance and embraced the message with open hearts, but others resisted strongly. Some people were uncomfortable with change. Others felt that their authority or status was threatened. Some simply refused to accept a message that required them to abandon their old ways. Because of this, the prophets often faced criticism that was unfair and painful. They were accused of things that were completely untrue. Their sincerity was questioned. Their motives were misunderstood. People sometimes mocked them or treated them as if they were foolish for speaking about faith, morality, and accountability before Allah. These reactions did not happen because the prophets were doing something wrong. They happened because human beings often resist messages that challenge their comfort or their pride. The story of the Prophet Muhammad illustrates this reality very clearly. He was known among his people for his honesty, his kindness, and his trustworthy character long before he began preaching the message of Islam. People called him Al-Amin, the trustworthy one. They respected him and valued his integrity. Yet when he began calling people toward the worship of one God and away from the practices they had followed for generations, many of those same people turned against him. They questioned his message, they insulted him, they spread false rumors about him, some even plotted to harm him. This dramatic change in the behavior of people shows how quickly human approval can shift when someone stands firmly for truth. A person who was once praised can suddenly become criticized simply because they choose to remain committed to what is right. The prophets continued their mission despite these reactions because their focus was not on pleasing people, but on fulfilling the responsibility given to them by Allah. They understood that their duty was to convey the message with sincerity, patience, and wisdom, while the acceptance of that message was ultimately in the hands of individuals and the will of Allah. Their commitment did not depend on applause or approval from the crowd. For believers, reflecting on these examples provides an important perspective on the challenges we face in our own lives. When someone decides to live according to Islamic values, they may sometimes encounter misunderstanding or criticism from others. A person who chooses honesty in a dishonest environment may be questioned or even ridiculed. Someone who tries to maintain modesty and discipline may be seen as strange by those who follow different lifestyles. A person who avoids wrongdoing may be labeled as overly strict or different. These experiences can feel discouraging if someone expects universal acceptance. But remembering the experiences of the prophets reminds us that facing disagreement or criticism does not automatically mean that a person is on the wrong path. Sometimes it simply means that they are standing firm on principles that others are not ready to accept. The prophets demonstrated patience and strength in the face of rejection because their sense of purpose was deeply connected to their relationship with Allah. Their mission was not driven by a desire for popularity or praise. It was driven by sincerity, faith, and obedience. They continued to speak the truth even when it was unpopular because they understood that the value of truth does not depend on how many people approve of it. Understanding this history can protect believers from falling into the trap of constantly seeking validation from others. When a person knows that even the most righteous individuals faced criticism, they begin to see negative reactions in a different light. Instead of immediately assuming that they must change themselves to gain approval, they begin to reflect more carefully on their intentions and their principles. Human beings are diverse in their personalities, beliefs, and expectations. Because of this diversity, disagreement is a natural part of life. No matter how careful or kind a person tries to be, there will always be individuals who misunderstand them or disapprove of their choices. The prophets themselves experienced this reality despite their extraordinary character and divine guidance. Recognizing this truth can free a person from the unrealistic burden of trying to satisfy every individual they encounter. It shifts the focus away from chasing universal approval and toward living with sincerity, patience, and faithfulness to what is right according to the guidance of Allah. Every human being fears something. Fear is a natural emotion placed inside us to protect us from danger and guide us away from harm. But the direction of that fear determines the direction of a person's life. When fear is placed in the wrong place, it begins to control decisions, shape behavior, and influence priorities in ways that slowly weaken a person's character and faith. One of the most common struggles people face is the fear of other people's opinions. The fear of being judged, rejected, criticized, or misunderstood can become so strong that it starts to control how a person lives. Many individuals find themselves constantly thinking about what others might say or think. Before making a decision, they imagine the reactions of family, friends, colleagues, or society. They hesitate to speak the truth because they are worried someone might get upset. They avoid standing for what is right because they are afraid of losing acceptance. This fear slowly becomes a silent force shaping their choices, guiding their behavior more than their own beliefs or values. Islam teaches believers that fear should be directed toward Allah in a way that strengthens the heart and clarifies priorities. When a person develops a deep awareness that Allah sees every action and knows every intention, their understanding of accountability becomes stronger. This awareness is not meant to create panic or despair, but to build responsibility and sincerity. A believer understands that their ultimate accountability is not before the opinions of people, but before the justice and knowledge of Allah. When fear of people becomes stronger than fear of Allah, a dangerous imbalance begins to appear in a person's life. Instead of asking whether something is right or wrong according to divine guidance, the mind starts asking whether people will approve or disapprove. Decisions begin to revolve around social acceptance rather than moral responsibility. A person may avoid doing something good simply because it might bring criticism. They may participate in something wrong because refusing it would attract negative attention. This type of fear quietly weakens a person's ability to stand firm on their beliefs. It encourages silence in moments where truth should be spoken. It encourages compromise in situations where integrity should be protected. Over time, the individual may begin to feel that their actions are no longer fully under their control because they are constantly reacting to the expectations and pressures of others. The fear of people can also create a constant sense of insecurity because human opinions are unpredictable. A person who depends on them for approval is always uncertain about how they will be treated. Praise can quickly turn into criticism, and support can quickly turn into rejection. Living with this uncertainty creates emotional instability where confidence rises and falls based on how others respond. In contrast, developing a healthy fear of Allah creates stability and strength. When a believer understands that Allah is the ultimate judge of their actions, their focus becomes clearer. Instead of being pulled in different directions by countless opinions, they anchor themselves to principles that come from faith and guidance. Their decisions become guided by sincerity rather than popularity. This does not mean that a believer ignores people's feelings or behaves harshly toward others. Islam strongly emphasizes kindness, humility, and respect. A person is encouraged to maintain good relationships, speak gently, and consider the impact of their actions on those around them. However, this kindness is balanced with a commitment to truth and righteousness. The believer does not abandon their principles simply to avoid criticism or gain approval. Many people struggle with the fear of standing out or being different. When someone begins practicing their faith more seriously, they may worry about how others will react. They may fear being labeled as extreme, strange, or overly religious. These concerns can create hesitation and self-doubt. A person may delay positive changes in their life because they are worried about how those changes will be perceived by others. Yet the strength of faith grows when a person learns to place their trust and accountability with Allah rather than with the opinions of people. This shift in mindset gradually frees the heart from constant worry about public judgment. A person begins to understand that approval from people is temporary and uncertain, while the pleasure of Allah is lasting and meaningful. When fear of Allah guides a person's actions, it produces courage rather than weakness. The believer becomes more willing to speak the truth respectfully, more willing to stand by their values, and more willing to choose what is right even when it is not popular. They develop patience when others misunderstand them and humility when others praise them. The difference between fearing people and fearing Allah is not simply about emotion. It is about the source of guidance in a person's life. Fear of people often leads to hesitation, compromise, and confusion. Fear of Allah leads to clarity, sincerity, and strength. When a person allows the fear of public opinion to dominate their heart, their decisions become shaped by shifting expectations. When they center their awareness on Allah's knowledge and justice, their actions begin to align more closely with faith, integrity, and purpose. In today's world, many people are unknowingly caught in a powerful trap: the constant need for validation. Human beings naturally appreciate appreciation and recognition. But when the desire for approval becomes a daily necessity, it slowly begins to control the way a person thinks, behaves, and measures their own worth. Instead of feeling satisfied by doing what is right, many individuals begin to measure their value by the amount of praise, attention, or acknowledgement they receive from others. This craving for validation has become even stronger in an age where people are constantly exposed to the opinions of others. A person may share their thoughts, their achievements, or even personal moments of their life, and then immediately begin waiting for reactions. They look for signs that others approve, admire, or agree with them. Compliments and positive feedback can create a brief feeling of happiness, while silence or criticism can create disappointment and self-doubt. Over time, this cycle can become addictive. A person may begin to adjust their actions not based on what they truly believe is meaningful, but based on what they think will receive the most approval. They might choose certain behaviors, words, or lifestyles simply because they know it will attract attention and praise. In this process, sincerity slowly begins to fade because actions are no longer done purely for their value or purpose, but for the reactions they will produce. One of the hidden dangers of constantly seeking validation is that it places control of a person's emotional state in the hands of others. When approval is received, the person feels confident and appreciated. When approval is absent or replaced by criticism, the person may feel rejected or discouraged. Their sense of self-worth rises and falls depending on how people respond to them. This creates an unstable emotional environment where peace of mind becomes dependent on factors that cannot truly be controlled. Another effect of this validation-seeking behavior is the gradual shift of intention. In Islam, intention is extremely important because it determines the true value of an action. Two people may perform the same action outwardly, but their intentions can make their actions completely different in meaning and reward. When someone begins to chase validation, their intention can slowly shift away from sincerity toward the desire for recognition. Acts that should be done quietly for the sake of Allah may start being performed in ways that attract attention or praise. This shift in intention can weaken the spiritual depth of a person's actions. Good deeds lose their purity when they are performed mainly to impress others. Instead of focusing on the connection between the individual and Allah, attention becomes focused on how others perceive those actions. The heart becomes attached to applause rather than sincerity, and the motivation behind good behavior becomes influenced by the desire to be seen as admirable or righteous. Another problem with social validation is that it often encourages comparison. When people constantly observe how others are praised or admired, they may begin comparing their own lives with those around them. They may wonder why someone else receives more attention or appreciation. This comparison can create feelings of jealousy, insecurity, or dissatisfaction with one's own progress. Instead of focusing on personal growth and sincere worship, the mind becomes distracted by how others are being perceived. Living for validation also places a person on a never-ending chase for approval. Even when someone receives praise or recognition, the satisfaction is usually temporary. Soon after, the desire for more approval returns. The person may feel pressured to continue meeting the expectations that others have formed about them. They may feel that they must constantly perform at a certain level just to maintain the same level of admiration or acceptance. Islam encourages believers to protect their sincerity and guard their intentions carefully. A believer is reminded that the most valuable actions are those done purely for the sake of Allah, even if no one else notices them. Acts of kindness, honesty, patience, and generosity carry immense value when they come from a sincere heart that seeks Allah's pleasure rather than human applause. When a person learns to detach their self-worth from the constant approval of others, they begin to experience a different kind of peace. They no longer feel the need to prove themselves to everyone around them. Their focus shifts from impressing people to improving their relationship with Allah. This shift creates a sense of stability because the purpose behind their actions becomes deeper and more meaningful. Instead of being motivated by temporary recognition, the believer becomes motivated by the awareness that Allah sees every effort and knows every intention. Even small acts done sincerely gain significance because they are connected to a higher purpose. The heart becomes less distracted by external reactions and more focused on the inner state of sincerity and faith. The trap of social validation is subtle because it often appears harmless at first. Wanting to be liked or appreciated is a natural human feeling. But when that desire becomes the driving force behind decisions and actions, it slowly changes the way a person views themselves and their purpose in life. The pursuit of approval can gradually replace the pursuit of sincerity, leading a person further away from the spiritual clarity that comes from acting purely for the sake of Allah. As we reflect on these reminders, one truth becomes very clear. Living your life to please everyone is a burden no human being was created to carry. People's expectations will always change. Their opinions will rise and fall. One moment they may praise you, and the next moment they may criticize you for the very same thing. If a person builds their identity around pleasing others, they will always feel pulled in different directions, constantly adjusting themselves just to maintain approval that was never guaranteed in the first place. Islam gives us a much clearer and more peaceful direction. A believer is not asked to chase the satisfaction of every person they meet. Instead, they are guided to focus on something far greater and far more meaningful, the pleasure of Allah. When this understanding settles in the heart, many of the pressures created by people's expectations begin to fade. The believer learns to treat others with kindness and respect, but their purpose is no longer controlled by public opinion. The lives of the prophets remind us that even the most righteous people were criticized and rejected by some. Their mission was never about popularity, it was about truth, sincerity, and obedience to Allah. They remained patient and firm even when people misunderstood them because they knew that their true accountability was not before the crowd, but before their Creator. When a person stops living for constant validation, they begin to rediscover sincerity. Their actions are no longer driven by applause or fear of criticism. They begin to do good quietly, speak truth respectfully, and stand by their values with confidence. Their heart becomes lighter because it is no longer chained to the unpredictable reactions of people. True freedom is found when a person understands that their worth is not determined by how many people approve of them, but by the sincerity of their intentions and the strength of their connection with Allah. When the goal becomes pleasing Allah above all else, a person gains clarity in their decisions, stability in their emotions, and peace within their heart. Instead of exhausting themselves trying to satisfy everyone, They focus on living with honesty, faith, and purpose, knowing that the one whose approval truly matters sees every effort, every struggle, and every sincere step taken toward what is right.